DCM works.
Yeah, if I could meet girls exclusively through 480p, I would get way more dates.
It was probably a song that reminded me of it, or I'd done an Arnold Schwarzenegger voice.
Writing is definitely an isolating thing.
From an outside perspective, that's weird as
It makes
fuck.
us look really mental.
But that is
Because of what it kind of said about art.
That had fun in bits. There were fun bits.
we went and bought a value pack of straps.
Oh my god, we did. There is a big lesson here to learn about storytelling.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Outriders podcast, official podcast of Digital and Creative Media Works. My name is David, DCM creative director, lead writer, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Ben.
Hello.
And today by friend of the show and special guest Gabe.
Hello.
I mean, what? You laughed like you were expecting more.
Who's Gabe?
Yeah.
I hear the audience ask.
They know. But if you don't know, Gabe, give us your 1 minute. Who are you? What do you
1
do?
minute. Wow. That's
1 minute. That's a pretty
generous.
extensive amount of time to pitch myself. Yeah. Look, basically, I'm on.
You've already started your timer, by the way.
Oh no, that's cool. I can keep it brief. I'm on movie maintenance. Sanspants Radio's movie maintenance. We fix bad movies sometimes, but most of the time we just kind of pitch fan fiction-y sequels. And that's more or less the sum of it. That's probably, if you're listening to this, probably where you know me from.
Or I assume that there is a large-ish demographic of people that have come and they've seen the Boone Shepard interviews that we've done, and they've seen that content as well.
Potentially that too.
Gabe is a published author. You can grab his book. The links will be in the show notes for all that promotional bizzo. If you want to go down there, you can grab it. We love it. There's a whole episode where we talk for like 2 hours about.
I think
Do you have an audiobook on Audible yet?
No, it's on iTunes. Isn't
It's on iTunes. It's not on Audible. I don't know. Ask Zaman about that. I don't know how that works.
Yeah, but if you can, it's free on iTunes. The whole thing's out.
Yeah,
now,
actually,
right?
that's the thing. Like nobody's.
Yeah.
I sort of kind of like brought it up with the publisher and Zaman. I was like, okay, so the whole thing's out on iTunes now, and like people can just kind of have it for free. And then they were like, oh, you should probably do something about that. And nothing's been done about it. So at the time of recording, the whole book's available for free on iTunes. So take advantage.
So
Get in on it.
What you're saying is download it all, delete your iTunes account, and keep it forever.
Yeah, basically.
Free book.
I don't get any money out of it, but hey, people read it, so whatever.
Okay, we had some technical difficulties, but we're back. And this week we are talking about the storytelling of Unfortunate Events, the Netflix TV show.
Look away, look away, look away, look away. The show will wreck your evening, your whole life and your day. Every single episode is nothing but dismay, so look away, look away, look away.
Okay, so you're a big fan, Gabe, and that's why we've got you here. It's not a weird coincidence. We didn't just think that this was like a good week to get you in. So I wanted to just start off with your general thoughts on the show as far as like how good it was as an adaptation and what you thought of it as a whole, because we loved it.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Look, it's a really funny thing because like A Series of Unfortunate Events, it's one of those series that I read it as a kid and I loved it very, very dearly as a kid. And I kind of found that as I got older, unlike Harry Potter, which I sort of like left in my childhood a bit, Unfortunate Events was one that my appreciation for only grew and grew, because the more I thought about it in retrospect, the more I realized just how extremely clever and extremely layered it actually is. And then, I mean, that was kind of bolstered by the release of the prequel series, All the Wrong Questions, which has just kind of, 2015, I think the last book came out, 4 books set 30 years before Unfortunate Events. It's probably the perfect prequel in that like it enriches Unfortunate Events while kind of doing its own thing as well. So when the TV series came along, like I think my love for the series had never kind of faded into nostalgia. I'd always still loved it the same way. And when it was announced, I was crazily excited. When the first trailers came out, I was crazily excited. And then I was lucky enough to get screeners for the first 4 episodes about a month before they came out to review them for Den of Geek. And when I watched that first episode, the whole first episode, it plays out quite similarly to how the movie did. Like, it's a fairly faithful adaptation, give or take a few little tweaks here and there.
Almost like beat for beat dialogue as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Some of the dialogue's exactly the same as the book, and it didn't hurt that right before I watched those first 4 episodes, I reread the first 2 books like in an afternoon, because you can read them in an hour. They're so short. And so the books were kind of fresh in my head when I watched those first 4 episodes, and then I went on and I reread the whole rest of the series before I watched the rest of the episodes when they came out. But it was the bit at the end of the first episode when Lemony Snicket gives his little monologue about, trouble and strife can cover this world like flames from a suspicious fire. And when that happens, all good, true, and decent people know that it's time to volunteer. And of course, anyone who's read the books knows that refers to VFD, the Volunteer Fire Department, the whole overarching conspiracy that very much characterizes the second half of the series. And the moment he said that, and it cut to like all the different names of all the different characters sort of on the walls around the secret passageways that VFD kind of has under the city, it was very similar to the moment at the end of the. I'm gonna mention Hannibal and everyone's gonna laugh, but like I'm just gonna throw it out there very quickly, just by point of comparison. Very similar to how I felt at the end of the first season of Hannibal, where it did something very similar that was like a very sort of loving, I guess, hand outstretched to the fandom that said in a very clear, very obvious way, if you have read and loved this source material, this is for you, because the people making this have read and love it as well and are going to treat it with the respect that the movie didn't give it.
I find that...
And I really felt that, like, to the point where I got goosebumps at the end of that first episode, and I thought, shit, this is perfect. And the rest of the series, there were so many moments throughout those 8 episodes where I actually kind of squealed and jumped up and down in my seat a bit. And because it wasn't like that kind of Rogue One style of fan service where it's like, let's throw as many like clumsy Easter eggs in here that literally serve no purpose other than being like, hey, look, here's that thing that's also from that film that you liked. And guess what? Here it is again. Do you recognize it? Oh, good for you.
Are you specifically referencing that moment in Force Awakens where John Boyega's character pulls out the like little laser droid that Luke used to train with? Like that kind of thing?
That wasn't nearly as incongruous as in Rogue One with the 2 guys from Tatooine when they run into them on the planet and they kind of walk past them and run into them. I'm like, this is literally bar. 3 days before A New Hope starts. Why are these 2 like Tatooine bums on this planet and then they're in Tatooine like a few days later drunk in a bar? How does that's fan service to the point where it becomes not only distracting but makes you question elements of the story, which it should never do.
Yeah.
Like, if you're going to do fan service, it should actually strengthen the narrative in a way that works, which is a kind of, I appreciate it's a fine line to walk, but I think Unfortunate Events did it extremely well, just in the way it set things up without being distracting, without being overbearing, without being annoying. Little things like Olaf mentioning the sugar bowl in the second episode, like Lemonie's speech at the end of the first episode, and like a lot of like, the little photos and newspaper clippings and bits and pieces Lemonie mentions throughout the series. I just thought it was, it wasn't, like most adaptations, it wasn't really how, I guess, I'd envisioned the books, but it was a very loving, very true to the spirit of the source material adaptation that I got a hell of a lot out of.
And isn't that really what you want? I always think that the concern with a lot of adaptations, and we've talked about this many times, we talked about it with Willy Wonka as well, where it's like, really what you don't want from an adaptation is a literal translation into film. Because some books, if they're not written by screenwriters, don't translate well.
Absolutely. And there is no dumber there's no dumber criticism in the history of dumb criticisms than, but that's not what it was like in the book. Because a book is a book, and a movie is a movie, and a TV show is a TV show. And different mediums have different demands. And I think the cleverest thing this TV show did, because the conspiracy stuff doesn't come into the books until the very end of the 5th book, and then it sort of slowly gets unfurled, whereas the TV show brought the VFD conspiracy stuff in sort of from the very first episode.
It's laden throughout.
Yeah, and for serialized television, that's a much more savvy way to go than just every 2 episodes is a rinse, repeat, reset. The Baudelaires go to a new kooky guardian in a new kooky location. Count Olaf turns up in a new kooky disguise. Misfortune befalls said guardian. The Baudelaires manage to get away by the skin of their teeth. Repeat, next episode. And there was an element of that, but by bringing in the conspiracy stuff earlier and giving an overarching sense of there are things that have to be uncovered and secrets that have to be revealed, it gave it a sense of narrative momentum that the early books definitely don't have.
And I think that's
which was a really clever update.
That was a very retrospective move. Like, from a narrative perspective, it was definitely like about book 4 or 5. It was like, oh shit, I need something more. I need to laden within, and you can tell that it's very much post-seeded,
And absolutely. The retconning is so glaring when you reread the series. It's things like, the tattoo of the eye on Olaf's ankle, which in the books, like the early books, there are photos of it and it's just an eye. And then like in the later books, it suddenly is the VFD insignia.
Yeah, it kind of transforms.
You're sort of thinking, and you're like, if this was actually meant and intended from the start, those early illustrations would have been that insignia. And there's so many different things that just like, and suddenly like retrospectively, the later books kind of imply that Josephine and Uncle Monty and Sir and all these characters were somehow involved in VFD when there was absolutely no hint of that whatsoever. Whereas a TV series can actually set it up earlier. And I think to me, it really feels like when you're writing a story and you finish the first draft, and often a first draft is very much kind of a process of discovering the story and discovering what it's all about, and you discover new things as you go. Whereas in a second draft, you sort of know what the story is, and you can go back and you can set things up and you can make it all feel more cohesive. And I'm not in any way saying that the books are a first draft, because I love the books, but it definitely feels like a sort of retroactive correction of those elements of the books that didn't quite gel.
For the body
and
of
the very
work,
obvious, and the very obvious sense in the books that this was not planned from the start.
See, for
I mean,
us,
I really like the way it organically unfolds, but seeding it earlier is by no means a bad thing.
and I think, as you say, like, it gives it the narrative momentum that it kind of, like, it gives you the punch through. But, you know, you and I have both read them, but Ben...
I haven't read any of the books.
So, from someone that's
It was a really interesting thing, because the only experience I had with the series was the film, and the film really doesn't have much in terms of that sort of conspiracy theory. It has elements of it sort of towards the end, because I ended up...
It very clumsily hints at it, but it doesn't do much with it.
I ended up rewatching the film after finishing the series, just because I was curious
How was that?
It wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. There are elements of the film I actually prefer, and there are elements of the film that I think they just do differently.
Look, curiously, I mean, just very quickly, because I'm really, really curious to hear what you thought about, I guess, what you thought about the TV show as somebody who was coming in cold, I suppose.
Yeah.
But, like, to me, I always quite liked the film because it sort of was the only, I guess, Unfortunate Events adaptation I had. But after watching those first 4 episodes, I remember having this moment where I thought about the film and I was like, it's not a film that I mind, but I don't think I'm ever going to watch it again because I have an overall better adaptation that is a lot truer to the things that I love about the books.
Yeah,
so
the film is
I don't
definitely...
know, I think...
The film's definitely useless after the series.
Absolutely.
It treads the exact same ground. Like we said, there are literally line for line similarities between the film and the series, but the pacing of it is just so much faster that there's not as much substance to it, really. The
show has a lot more room to kind of explore and extrapolate on things that the film sort of condensed, I guess.
Yeah, and with the whole conspiracy thing and the series, it's the kind of thing where, because I have no idea what the volunteer fire department is, so I guess thanks for that spoiler. But
it doesn't mean anything to you yet.
No, that's the thing. Watching the series, you have this idea of like, oh, there's something going on because he has the spyglass, which is, you know, the symbol that is everywhere in the...
Well, half a spyglass.
Well, yeah, but half the spyglass. But he has that symbol, and you're like, you keep seeing that symbol in places, and you're thinking it's got to be something. And they ended on that.
Yeah.
They ended on such a sort of almost kind of a cliffhangery note, where you have an idea throughout the series that like, oh, there's definitely something more, especially with the inclusion of the parents as actual characters, which caught me off guard because, again, I've only seen the film and the parents are dead in the film. Well, implied dead. You don't really know. But in this, they introduce them so early on that you're like, oh, the parents are fine. Then they kind of just pull and tug you around with them for a while in the later episodes.
And so did you think did you think that those parents are the Bodil? Like, do you
still have no idea.
So do you know, like, from the show, because Gabe and I know the way that...
Well, I guess you guys know, yeah.
But for you, for someone who hasn't seen it, obviously, like, we don't want to spoil the whole series, but for someone who hasn't seen it or read the books, did you get a sense, like, are they...
If I was gonna put a shot in the dark, I would say yes, they probably are the parents.
Wait, hang on, but... So you've seen the whole show, right?
I've seen up to the end, yeah.
Yeah, we've seen.
Okay, cool. So
I know that.
So you've seen.
I know they are technically parents of other kids, but part of me is thinking, like, part of me is like, that can't be it. But again.
Oh, look, it's okay. I'm just gonna this isn't really a spoiler. It's just
go for it.
Because the Quagmire triplets, who are the kids of those two parents, they're really, really major characters in the series going forwards.
Yeah,
so this was one thing. I'm interested you said that, because there's one thing I was really curious about. Because I was sitting there watching it, and when it was revealed that they were the Quagmire parents, I was like, oh, cool. Like, to a fan of the books, that's really cool, because I know that that's setting up for what happens later on with the Quagmire parents and their relationship with the Baudelaires, the Quagmire triplets, and how that goes forwards. But I was thinking, to somebody who wasn't familiar with the books, you'd probably watch that, and if you realize it wasn't the Baudelaire parents, you'd probably just sit there and think, wait, why'd I spend so much time following those characters who had nothing to do with the main plot?
No, I definitely felt that.
Unless they've done a huge change, I'm 99% sure there's no way they'll be the Baudelaire parents.
No.
Only because the Quagmires are so significant in the series going forward.
I guess the biggest hint is the fact that at the end you have two of what I assume are the other kids at the same school. that
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
at. So by the end, you're like, oh, I guess they're like the additional characters, the other characters in the series for the later
Yeah,
stories.
particularly in the arc at the school,
Yeah.
they're going to be very significant.
like-
So out of curiosity, the conspiracy stuff aside, coming in fresh, did you find, I guess, the structure of it with every 2 episodes was sort of obviously a
Sort of
restart
one of the
because every
books,
2 episodes
yeah.
were a different book? Did you find that repetitive or tedious or tiresome at all?
I guess
because a lot of people say that about the books, the early books.
I liked it because I've known of the sort of general way the story works from the film. So I knew it was this idea of I knew of the first 3 sort of situations.
From the movie.
The marriage, quote unquote, the reptile room and the house. I forget the name of it. So I'd known of those 3 situations. I didn't know of the logging one. But
Yeah.
by like the 4th episode, 3rd episode, really, I'd sort of realized, oh, they're doing that. Like, this is sort of how they're structuring it, especially with the whole part 1, part 2. I liked it because it wasn't like, I was talking about this with David, it wasn't like Sherlock where they didn't just take one of the books and make an hour-and-a-half long thing about it and then go, that's your 1 episode, have 4 episodes.
Yeah. And they made some really savvy changes, particularly to like one of the big one I really liked was that in the books when, they finish up with Aunt Josephine and then the next book just starts with Mr. Poe dropping them off at the mill. Whereas the show changed it so that the Baudelaires actually go to the mill of their own volition and run away from Mr. Poe.
Yeah.
Which I really liked because it made it less repetitive. It made the Baudelaires feel like they had a lot more agency, like they were actually trying to seek something themselves
about
instead
to
of
say the
literally
word
just being
agency.
dumped on the door of
Yeah,
the next.
I think if they had done them being dropped off by Mr. Poe, I would have been like, oh, come on.
And I
Yeah.
think it's such an important move for them at that point because then it's the first time in the show that their suffering is effectively self-inflicted. I know it's not because they
Yes.
have no other option, but it's the first time that they go from being a victim of their story to a perpetrator of the unfortunate events that befall
Yeah.
them. And I think that's so important, particularly given what I know
Particularly in
about
the-
the school.
yeah.
Like I don't know. I think that adds so much more flavor and variety to
And
those
also because like a lot of the arc of the books is like because I found when I reread the books, because when I was a kid, I was reading them a lot further apart. When I reread them before the show, I sort of binge read them. Like I was going through like 1 a day, if not more. And when I got to the 4th one, that was the one where I was like, oh, it's just, and a lot of people I know say they give up around the 4th one because it's just kind of one too many.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, another shit Guardian, another grim location. And the 5th one kind of represents a change because the boarding school environment's a bit different. And also you get the Quagmires. So they actually have other people to talk to who are just as decent as them. And also the 5th one is when the VFD stuff actually comes in. So the 5th one's kind of the first major turning point. But like the first 3, they're different enough flavors to kind of keep you interested. Then the 4th one is kind of like, okay, again. So I think it was a really savvy choice to have them kind of seizing control there and I guess grabbing their own destiny, even if it fell through. Because that kind of is where the books go a lot later on. Like when you get to like book 7 or 8, when it kind of really breaks formula and it stops just being Guardian after Guardian after Guardian and becomes a lot more serialized, the Baudelaires are making a lot more choices for themselves. And a lot of those choices aren't the right choices. And so they end up, particularly in like the last 3 or 4 books, there are a lot of moments where the Baudelaires make some really questionable choices, and the book calls attention to them.
I mean, there were
And there's a
literally
lot-
conversations about morality and whether it was the
Oh,
right
yeah,
thing to
and-
do. And we don't want to spoil
and there's
those,
a lot
obviously,
of
but
no, but there's a lot of like, are we actually any better than Count Olaf? Because he thinks he's doing what he's doing for good reasons.
So do we.
We think we're doing what we're doing for good reasons, and other people are looking at us and saying you're criminals because of this. And it gets very, very like, I mean, I saw Daniel Handler talk at a event in Melbourne a couple of years ago, and he had this really fascinating story where he was talking about no, I mean, first and foremost, he showed us a clip from an old Hitchcock film. And in the film, it was like, bad guy and good guy facing off. Bad guy's got the gun aimed at the good guy. And basically, the bad guy's about to shoot the good guy when the bad guy's child runs in between them. And the good guy's immediately like, oh, okay, hey kid, we're going for a piggyback, and picks up the child, holds her in the way of the gun. And the child's like giggling, thinking she's going for a piggyback.
Holy
and he
shit.
uses the child as a human shield to get out of there.
Yeah.
And Daniel Handler said that, like, as a kid, this was kind of how he felt about the world, where he felt like he was just a pawn in the stories of adults where he was being used for various things and that he could never quite understand because they're all so strange and didn't seem to come together, didn't seem to make sense. And that he always, for that reason, resented children's stories that had contrived happy endings where everybody got what they deserved, because he was like, look, the people who bullied you and the people who wronged you, most of the time, they will just go on in their lives and never think about you again, and they'll just be fine.
And they'll
because it's
probably
wrong.
become prime minister.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, or, more pertinently, president. But like,
Well,
it's wrong to kind of, to teach kids that that's the way the world
Well,
works
it's a lie.
when it's not.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's an unfaithful
also,
lie.
and morality isn't black and white. And there's so much of that in Unfortunate Events, particularly in the second half of the series, where and the TV show alluded to that really nicely when Charles in the final episode says, I have to go and find Sir. One day you'll understand things aren't so black and white. And that's a really nice foreshadowing of the more morally ambiguous territory the series will stray into towards the back end.
Especially planting those seeds. I mean, and as we've said, one of the biggest struggles with the books was that a lot of the, as a writer, something that you do when you're planning, if you're going to serialize a story, your first and foremost goal is to tell a good contained story, but at the same time, you plant enough seeds that if you're going to write a sequel, you can write one that works. And something the show
Absolutely.
did well is it said to itself, we've got this limited space to tell a story, so what we're going to do, instead of and I'll talk about Sherlock again in a minute, as much as the S word bothers me. Something that Unfortunate Events did incredibly well is they said to themselves, we have these... It's 8 episodes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they 8 episodes. They were like, we're going to tell a discrete, solid narrative in 8 episodes that works, but we're going to plant these seeds for the next season if we get it. But, we're going to focus on telling a good story by itself. And that's something that a lot of TV shows don't do, because good, in inverted commas, good TV shows now, their job is to get renewed. And the way you get renewed is people demanding more. And Sherlock is a great example of this, where their mentality to the end of every season is no longer, how do we wrap up, season 1, 2, and to an extent, the start of 3, was how do we make these well-contained narratives within each episode with an overarching plot that is satisfactory in that season that ends. Season 2 did that very well, and by season 3, they were like, fuck, we need to do that, but also plant these aggressive seeds that will mean that people want to come back next season. So instead of telling a contained narrative that worked, what they ended up doing was telling semi-contained narratives with these weird, dovetails in the middle of all of it for, future episodes so that people would demand more, so they get renewed. Instead of what you should do, which is tell a good story, plant some subtle seeds, and then watch your show actually become, quality.
Well, that's why I still kind of say to this day that the reason my favorite Star Wars film is A New Hope is because A New Hope is the only Star Wars film that is a contained, complete, satisfying story where if there wasn't a sequel, if there wasn't another one, and that was it, it'd be fine.
Yeah.
Because you still would have got a story with a beginning, middle, and an end that wrapped up in a satisfactory way where it says, yeah, there could be more adventures, but if there aren't any, that's fine. You're not going to feel robbed. And that's kind of, I think, a mistake that a lot of franchise filmmaking and TV shows as well fall into nowadays, where there's this almost arrogant assumption that we'll get a second one. And so they leave these huge glaring questions and these huge unresolved plot threads at the expense of their own story. It's ultimately kind of like, robbing Peter to pay Paul, where they take things away from their own narrative to sustain future narrative threads that they might not even get to tell,
Which is fucking mental, because basically, it's baffling, because if you turned up to an editor and you were like, here's my manuscript, and what we're doing, and I don't know how this works in Hollywood anymore, but basically what you're doing is you're turning up with a piece of paper that says, what we're going to do is we're going to make a pretty average show, maybe subpar, with the expectation that we can make another one after it that's going to be maybe slightly better because we had a subpar one before it. It's mental. And it's I think that's why I loved Unfortunate Events. It's because as much as it's miserable to watch, and as much as there is so much unhappiness, I think it's so I enjoyed it so much because every episode ended and I was like, good. If I stopped now, I would be relatively satisfied that I had an okay time and I was entertained and it told a good story, because that episode was well structured. Maybe it had a cliffhanger, but every episode has a resolution of some kind. Even if it's not
Yes.
the story is fixed and everyone is happy, there is a resolution for the narrative structure of that episode.
Well,
and that's hard to do.
Every second episode has a good ending.
To a degree. I mean, I think
There's still obvious cliffhangers when you're halfway through sort of.
but the cliffhanger
one of
doesn't
the
change
books.
the narrative structure of that.
But also,
episode.
even so, I mean, I can, there's a big problem, particularly with streaming television nowadays, where, the thing is, in TV, particularly traditional TV, the idea was that, you have your 3-act structure for every episode, and particularly back in the days before streaming, before DVD box sets, when people might not have seen every episode, you'll notice that TV was a lot more episodic. Every episode kind of felt like its own sort of story, which may or may not have like sitcoms do this all the time, but there's essentially a reset button that gets hit at the end of every episode. Procedurals are the same, and now that we're getting into kind of the more streaming age where people like binging, we sort of are in a weird state where shows like Game of Thrones and House of Cards have sort of lost the craft of individual episodes, because every episode kind of just sort of bleeds into the next one. And so, watching an individual episode of Game of Thrones or House of Cards can be really unsatisfying because there's no resolution. Whereas something that Mad Men did extremely well was that even though there was an overarching plot, and Breaking Bad was the same, every episode still had a clear objective, a clear plot, and a clear sort of resolution of sorts, even if there was a cliffhanger. And Unfortunate Events, I noticed that as well, because it's not just like, they're not like chapters in a book. It's like the first episode is, this is how the Baudelaires deal with Count Olaf. The second episode is, this is how the Baudelaires deal with Count Olaf trying to marry Violet, because the marriage plot isn't brought up at all in the first episode. Third episode is, this is how the Baudelaires acclimate to living with Uncle Monty. Fourth episode, this is how the Baudelaires deal with Uncle Monty's murder. And so you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, even though the episodes are sort of, in theory, they're kind of two parts of a whole, because every 2 episodes is an adaptation of another book, the episodes still have a clear beginning, middle, end, a clear 3-act structure, a clear resolution, which isn't necessarily hampered by the cliffhanger. I mean, obviously you want to watch more, but there is an objective in each episode which is to some degree resolved by the end of the episode.
It's the
Because for the whole first episode of Unfortunate Events, the whole first episode, even right up until the point where they're making the pasta puttanesca for Olaf, the Baudelaires are saying, maybe we can make this work, maybe we can make this work, maybe we can make this work. And it's only at the end of the episode where Klaus says to Violet, this is not better than nothing, that they realize we have to get out of here. Because the whole first episode, their intention isn't we're going to get out of here. Their intention is we have to make this work because this is our lot in life now. And it's not until Olaf hits Klaus, which is obviously the climactic part of the episode. And by the way, was so much more fucked and disturbing than the movie ever was.
Yeah,
like the movie.
That was a big thing. The movie, they just gloss over it like it's nothing. But in
yeah,
the
same with the marriage plot.
Yeah,
like when he hits and with Aunt Josephine's death, like when he hits Klaus in the movie, immediately he hits him, and Jim Carrey just goes, "You all saw it. The child fell." And when he tries to marry Violet, he's got this whole bit where he's like, "You're going to have to do my dishes and clip my thick toenails and wash my yellow underwear. And hey, marriage is no picnic. Isn't this funny? I'm marrying a 14-year-old." Whereas in the TV show, you've got that awful, horrible bit where Klaus is like to Olaf, "Don't touch her," and Olaf is like, "I'll touch whatever I want," and literally grabs Violet and pulls her to him. Like, the threat of Olaf in the movie was so toned down, whereas the threat in the TV show is so clearly evident where you're watching it and saying, as funny and as good as Neil Patrick Harris is, this is a bad man who, when he turns up every time, I had a sinking feeling. When Jim Carrey turned up in the movie, I was like, what kooky thing is he going to do this time?
That's a big difference in the film, is that the Count Olaf in the film is basically just Jim Carrey being Jim Carrey,
and he's a buffoon.
Yeah.
Like, there's, and you know,
it's the
even
difference between Jared Leto's Joker and Heath Ledger's.
Yeah, except one of those is bad, right? I think I actually do like Jim Carrey's Olaf in the setting of the film, where him slapping what's his name, Klaus, doesn't matter. You know, where stuff like that is just like, it's just washed over. If they put Neil Patrick Harris into the film, it would be weird. And if they put Jim Carrey into the series, it would be just as
by
weird.
MPH, only because it's Neil Patrick Harris and he's obviously very funny and he's like a famous comedic actor. I think I thought Olaf was going to be a lot funnier. And when I watched the first episode, I was always
That's unfortunate.
Well, but that's it. Like, you know, I was because I'd owned the only on-screen depiction of Olaf I'd seen before was Jim Carrey.
Yeah.
And Olaf in the first book isn't funny at all. He's just horrible. Whereas as the series goes on, Olaf gets more heightened and gets more ridiculous, even while that menace is still there. Whereas like Neil Patrick Harris had a lot of like really funny lines. Like one of my favorite lines in the show is when he's like the Baudelaires, "Oh, I hope I can be the father you never had." And they're like, "We have a father." "Well, we had a father." And he's like, "Yes, and a mother. Remarkable woman. Flammable." And it's just like, oh, that's fucking horrible.
Yeah.
It's so good.
It's so it's so pointed. Oh, I love it.
Yeah, it's and even like the bit where he throws Josephine to the leeches, which in the movie he just left her on a boat.
Yeah.
Whereas in the book, like he throws her into he
pushes
literally
out
throws
the
her to the
convenient
leeches, and it
gap
was the
in
same in
the-
the show. It's fucking horrible. The leeches are awful, terrifying creatures, and he literally throws a woman to them to be eaten alive. That's in a children's TV series.
Yeah, it's yeah, but I mean, but
I don't think
that,
think this the Netflix series is a children's series anymore. I think
I think that's why it works so well. Right?
yeah, it's a weird.
But
sort
that's
of,
the thing, though. There's nothing in the series that is any darker than anything that was in the books, and the books were children's books.
But
it's
I
just
think
that.
it's a
I think that's a
tonal-
medium thing.
Yeah, it's
Because
yeah.
there are a lot of
But also, I don't know. Like, look at the fact is, like, what I think characterizes unfortunate events across both TV series and book series is the fact that it's just this complete willingness to not talk down to kids, to say, yeah, the world is dark and scary and horrible. And the thing is, kids can handle a lot more than any of us than we tend to assume they can. I mean, kids grew up reading, like, for hundreds of years, kids have grown up reading grim fairy tales, watching things like The Dark Crystal, which is really unsettling, watching Indiana Jones films, which can, particularly in, like, Temple of Doom, get really, really scary. Like, kids can handle darkness.
I
and
don't think
unfortunate
there is
events,
actually anything in the series that is particularly like I don't know if they give sort of ratings to Netflix series.
It's PG.
It's PG,
okay.
yeah.
Is it?
Like
Well,
it's really not. It's actually not that bad when you think about
Well,
it.
we talked about this, Gabe, during when we were talking about the Boone Shepherd release, and that, you know, I don't know if it was actually on microphone or not, but we talked a bit about how the having, you know, a slightly older protagonist in a young adult fiction novel is not necessarily what people want, and, you know, Darius in particular is a really dark character to have in a book for younger people. But you know, the truth is that it works because kids know, like, kids aren't stupid. They know that the world is fucking shit. They know the world is dark. They know that bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people. And they know when they come into a show like Unfortunate Events or they read the books, they know straight off the bat that something bad is going to happen to people because bad things happen. And sometimes good things happen, you know?
And the thing is, like, there are a lot of kids in the world, you know, kids who will have tragedy in their lives from an early age, kids who will lose family members, who will have bad things happen to them. And they're sitting there, you know, reading Enid Blyton stories or whatever and thinking, this is not what my life is like. I don't see my life reflected in this at all. I don't get this. This is not how things are. And I think, like, as a kid, stories like that always frustrated me because I was like, well, I don't buy it. This isn't, like, you know, I had a perfectly fine upbringing, but, like, I wasn't always happy and always, like, you know, cheerful and chirpy
Skipping
because
through
that's
the
just
fucking
not
fields.
exactly. And that's because that's not what life is. I mean, my favorite film when I was a kid, and still one of my favorite films as an adult, was The Prince of Egypt, which is a children's cartoon in which thousands of children are murdered by God. And it is treated with exactly the amount of weight that something as fucked up, unsettling, and disturbing as that needs.
Prince of Egypt is one
It's
of
an
the
amazing
best
film.
DreamWorks films.
I fell in love with
Ever
that
made.
right after I watched
Prince of Egypt
Joseph
is the
Joseph and the King of Dreams.
it's the animated one, right? I am thinking.
Yeah,
of the
they're
right
all
film.
animated.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. There was like a series. It was weird. They did a series of like animated Bible stories. It was weird.
Yeah, I think I watched some of the Joseph one, and I was like, "This is straight to DVD. This isn't as good as Prince
Lots
of
of
Egypt."
singing. It's weird. Like, not good singing though. Yeah, that was a weird era of like cartoons and animated stuff. But I think what we've reached now, like, and I don't know if it's just maybe we're out of touch with the kids. I don't know, but like I feel like now kids are growing up. They're aware. Like they, you know, when we grew up, the internet was just a thing. Like no one was familiar with the internet. No one was like savvy with the internet. We didn't have a knowledge of the, you know. You had your knowledge of your sphere of like life. You only knew about the stuff that you're involved with and what people told you about. But now kids can like learn about anything. You know, 12-year-olds have fucking iPhones. They know about Syria. They know about the bad
They
shit
know
that's
who
happening.
Trump is.
They know who Trump is. They know what's happening in America. Like they know that America's burning from the inside. And it's this weird situation now where you're basically asking kids who no longer have like a childhood filter to absorb and take on board these like fantastic ideas of like happy stories and good endings, you know?
And that's what it frustrates the fuck out of me. Like, look, I mean, we're here to talk about Fortunate Events. I don't want to talk about my own stuff here, but like,
It's fine.
I had a
we're this far
meeting.
in.
Yeah, look, I mean, this just by way of example. I had a meeting yesterday with a producer who is interested in optioning Boone Shepherd as a TV series. And I was talking to him about it, and he goes, yeah, like I really love it. It's something I really want to do, but you're going to have to tone down the violence. You're going to have to get rid of the guns. You're going to have to get rid of the death. You're going to have to get rid of all of that. And I'm sitting here thinking, okay, like one of my biggest influences on Boone Shepherd was Lemony Snicket for the exact reason that it does not talk down to children. It assumes that children can handle things. And that's kind of something that's really important to what I want to do with Boone Shepherd. So I'm sitting there thinking, and like, to his credit, I said to this guy, I was like, well, like, hang on. I mean, you know, do you you do realize that's an important part of the series, right? And he goes, no. He goes, I do. It's not me. I think kids can handle it. I love Tintin and stuff like that. What concerns me, it's not me saying this. It's the producers. It's Screen Australia. It's the people who will fund this. That's what they assume.
I think it's a weird,
which is,
cultural
a huge
thing
problem
almost.
with like producers making creative calls, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. It's just something that frustrates me.
No, but I think
It's a weird cultural thing where like you can have like if you look at like series of unfortunate events and you look at the bad stuff that's in it, a lot of it's kind of this. I don't really know how to put it. A lot of it's not guns, is probably the best way to put it.
Yeah.
And because there's such this aversion,
But-
especially now, where like if you have a gun, it's bad, but if you have someone getting eaten by leeches, oh, that's fine.
Well,
it's
like,
not worse
look
or
at The
anything,
Walking
despite
Dead.
But
it
also,
being
I mean,
yeah.
worse.
this kind of the really beautiful thing that Netflix is doing is that they're giving creators freedom, because like the backstory to the Unfortunate Events TV show's production is that Daniel Handler, who wrote the novels, and Barry Sonnenfeld, who directed the TV series, they were originally the creative team doing the movie, and they wanted to do something very faithful and very dark. And the producers said no, and eventually both of them got fired, and they brought in other producers,
Jesus.
and the movie tones down the darkness of the series.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing that happened to the Golden Compass adaptation, where it toned down all the
Those
bleakness
books
and darkness.
were so good.
The books are incredible.
Oh, I mean, the second
and
one's
really
a bit,
dark.
but they're good.
Oh, but it's a middle chapter. I mean, like
Yeah.
the Golden Compass is another one that's all about the fact. It's all about growing up. It's all about children learning,
But in a world that is
complexity
so
and learning moral
unforgiving.
complexity. Yeah, absolutely, which is what's so good about it. And
Hmm.
this is kind of what's really good about like the era of Netflix, where they are letting creators tell the stories they want to tell with an obvious lack of interference, sometimes for better or worse, Jessica Jones. But like
The end of Luke Cage.
I haven't seen Luke Cage.
Oh,
but like
well-
in the case of look, I said with Luke Cage, if one person who didn't like Jessica Jones, like really didn't like Jessica Jones
Yeah.
and thought that it was as much of an overrated, badly put together piece of shit as I thought, if one person
Yeah.
who thinks that tells me Luke Cage is good, I will watch Luke Cage. And nobody did.
Am I allowed to? Because I feel like this might be the wrong time and place, but I really like Luke Cage. I didn't like Jessica Jones. I thought it was just
Okay,
overdone.
all right.
I would say I liked, you know what, actually, to preface this, I liked David Tennant and Jessica Jones, but I thought the whole
Yeah, me
show was
too.
a bit overconflated and it just tried too hard. And some of the scripts, I was like, what happened? Did you not have a writer's room? But Luke Cage was dumb and fun and super stylish.
Luke Cage is good shit. I haven't seen Jessica Jones, so
Okay,
my
Ben has no
opinion is
idea.
void.
Don't watch it on that, but like think about it, you know.
Okay, cool. That's the first mildly compelling review I've heard of Luke Cage. So that
You know
might
what? If that doesn't convince you, every episode features a new musical guest who is from the like Brooklyn Queens hip hop scene,
okay.
which is amazing. And like no other show has ever done anything like that, where every episode you get a new live performance from a new band or hip hop group within the show that makes sense in the show, and it's fucking awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, that's my sell for Luke Cage, which is not what we're here to talk about, but I just thought it was...
right,
the reason I brought that up is that I think that Luke Cage did something where it took the source material and it made it... Because Luke Cage, they were dumb comics. You know, he wore like a tiara for a long time. It was real weird. But what they did is they took the idea of it and they made it into a show that was not only accessible, but told the message they wanted it to and did the things they wanted it to and operated in the way that they wanted it to. And the studio wasn't like, you can't do that. They were like, yeah, go for it. Have fun. As long as you don't break the rules of our universe, just do whatever you want. And what we got was a show that was cohesive, fun, and interesting. Whereas... you know, previously, as I think you were saying, and this is the reason I don't like Doctor Who anymore, is that you get to a point where the studios are like, no, we have to get the views to get the funding. We have to get the views to get the funding. And eventually, the shows become, how do we get the most people to watch it? How do we cut together trailers that get the most people to watch it? How do we get the most, like, catchphrases and taglines and explosions? Whereas Unfortunate Events, like, definitely took it back to that place where, you know, like House MD was a show where every episode was a faithful representation of what they wanted to make. And I feel like Unfortunate Events is a return to that kind of form where you make an episode and a show that is just the vision that you go to sleep at night. I imagine this must have been what it was like for them making it. They went to bed every night. They were like, this thing that we're making, I believe in. And I genuinely think it's going to succeed.
It was so clearly, and that's what I think is really. I mean, and look, there's an argument to be made that like full creative control isn't always the best thing in the world. I mean, like George Lucas's wilder creative impulses were very, very curtailed in the first Star Wars trilogy. Like he had some crazy ideas for A New Hope that the studio were like, no. And, you know, it turned out to be a really good film. So like there's arguments to be made for and against that. Like too much creative freedom isn't necessarily a good thing. Too much studio control is usually a bad thing. But like, you know, it's an imperfect science in like what makes a good film or what makes a good TV series. But in the case of Unfortunate Events, I think what makes it work is the fact that the people making it have an extremely clear creative vision and they're setting out to make something and they made exactly the show they wanted to make. And I would say that at least even if the show doesn't do well, and it's like the ratings, I mean, Netflix doesn't release explicit ratings, but apparently Luke Cage was their highest rated show and Unfortunate Events has done better than it.
Oh, wow.
So
that's impressive,
it's
actually.
It's gonna do, like, it will do well, but even if it didn't do well, like, at least, you know, Daniel Handler has spent a lot of the last 10 years excusing himself for the movie and, like, dancing around the fact that he thought the movie was really disappointing, the movie wasn't an accurate depiction of the books, while, you know, because he's famously extremely polite and like while kind of avoiding saying outright the studio fucked my vision, like he's made it very clear that he was unhappy with the movie, whereas at least I would suspect that Daniel Handler can walk down the street with his head held high and be like, no, look, I made a really, really good, really compelling, really cool realization of something, you know, of my creative vision for Unfortunate Events. And not only that, but I could go back and correct the things that didn't work in the books or the things that perhaps weren't as strong as the later books were when he kind of like got more into the rhythm of it. Because, I mean, you know, the series starts out as a dark joke where it's like, oh, there are no happy endings. Watch bad things happen to unfailingly nice kids. And then as it goes on, it gets more complex and it gets more interesting and it gets more, you know, narratively daring, I suppose, and all sorts of things. And now he can bring those like more interesting elements, as we said at the start of this, he can bring those more interesting elements from the later books in a lot earlier while still maintaining that central spirit of bad things will happen and you're just going to have to deal with it if you want to watch this show. And for my money, I think it's worked absolutely fantastically. I think it is a resounding success of a TV show.
Totally. I think we totally agree. And, you know, one of the things I wanted to touch on is... And, you know, this is something that I've talked about before a lot, because I'm a big fan of Edgar Allan Poe, and I really like Christopher Nolan's films and Jonathan Nolan's writing. And one of the things they both do very well, the Nolans and Poe, is they both are really good at constructing a narrative that's compelling. So in Poe's case, it might be unreliable. In Nolan's case, you know, you're talking about Memento and that kind of interesting framing device. And one of the things that I think Unfortunate Events did well, and obviously the books did it well, in that kind of book thief kind of way, where it was like, you know, book thief was like this omniscient death narrator who was adding this flavor. I mean, I adore that book, and one of the things that obviously is a big flavor of Lemony Snicket is Lemony Snicket, and I think the show's treatment of how do we tell the story through this lens, and the way that they produced it was so beautiful. Like the way that they use those shots and the kind of, I don't know what the expression for it is or the literary term, but the way that they use like the parallel uneven timelines with Snicket telling the story, and then you know, like the way that they treated that. There's
like a meta narrative almost with Lemony Snicket going on top of the story that he's telling.
But it's never too much. Like one of the things that a lot of, I mean, books in particular will struggle with is that meta narrative becomes, it's like the Assassin's Creed problem. The biggest problem with the Assassin's Creed franchise is that the meta narrative is way more important than the main narrative of the story. Whereas this, it felt like there was a bit of a push and pull, where Lemony Snicket's meta narrative was informing and having like a tug of war with the events of the story.
Yeah, it complements the main story rather than detracting from it.
Yes.
And it's like, I think it's really interesting because, you know, in the movie, Jude Law obviously played Lemony Snicket as very much kind of the quiet, reflective writer type, whereas Patrick Warburton played him more like a noir detective. And it's interesting because like in the book series, you don't quite realize that Lemony Snicket is actually a character in the series until about the 5th or the 6th book. Because up until then, he just kind of seems like the quirky narrator. And then you sort of realize he's actually a character in this universe telling this story as somebody who has experienced at least part of it. And then there's that bit that still gives me goosebumps in the 12th book where they meet him. At least you think it's him. It's not made clear that it's him, and he's described as like, you know, this tall man in an overcoat smoking a cigarette with a hat kind of shading his face, and he's every inch the noir detective sort of character. And if you read All the Wrong Questions, which is about Lemony Snicket as a 13-year-old boy solving crimes and mysteries,
which by the way, amazing.
Like, I love. Have you read them?
Yeah.
Oh, I think they're absolutely incredible. I think in some ways they're better than a series of Unfortunate Events.
I would agree, but only if you've read Unfortunate Events.
Yeah, look, they're two series complement each other beautifully, but like I think the difference between them, and I think Daniel Handler said this as much, that Unfortunate Events very much is in the tradition of gothic literature, whereas All the Wrong Questions is very much in the tradition of noir, and because again, like the and there are a couple of like really nice little references to All the Wrong Questions in the TV series, because like by presenting Lemony Snicket as sort of a noir detective type character, it sort of harkens back to the 13-year-old him from All the Wrong Questions. And there's this one little bit that kind of got my little geek heart fluttering, where Klaus says, I think it's Violet says to Klaus in the Wide Window episode, she's like, oh, what's that thing Mother used to say, like, do the scary thing first and get scared later. And in All the Wrong Questions, that's young Lemony Snicket's mantra.
Yep.
And when you hear that, you're like, oh, of course, because Lemony Snicket would have told their mother that.
I had like weird goosebumps when that happened.
And it was a really, really cool little moment.
think
It was just like,
I think the reason that worked is that it didn't, like, in any other show, that would like detract from the moment because it would feel like out of place.
Yeah, it didn't.
Like,
it didn't
but that's the
whoosh.
thing.
It didn't whoosh me as someone who hasn't read the books. I wasn't like, why would they? That makes no sense. Like, it was just like, oh,
see,
okay, it's just
like,
something their mother said.
coming back like the Rogue One problem. Like, okay, so if you watch Rogue One and hadn't seen the original
my
Star
God,
Wars
you'd be so
films,
confused.
which wouldn't work at all because it's complete addendum to them that just doesn't make sense without them because it's just not a good film. But like, if you watched it and you saw those two guys from Tatooine on that planet, you'd be like, why the fuck did that shot hold on them for like an extra 5
yeah.
seconds?
I don't care
And then
about
like when
Star Wars,
R2D2 and
I
C3PO
didn't
turn
know
up.
who those two guys.
I picked up on who they were, but I was like, who cares?
I
was like, I don't give a fuck.
I don't give a shit about Star
But that's
Wars,
it. It's
so I
like,
didn't know.
why?
I was like, that's
Yeah.
weird.
But I mean, that's not even the most irritating one. Like, I mean, if you watched Rogue One and didn't know anything about Star Wars, you'd be like, who the fuck is this guy in the weird black armor who's like, why is there heroic music playing when he's cutting up all the good guys?
So
what the
weird.
fuck is going on with
Yeah.
this? Whereas like, in this, like moments like that, little Easter eggs like that, what's so elegant and clever about, I guess, for want of a better phrase, the fan service in Unfortunate Events, is the fact that it has it's got that kind of layered sort of double effect of not only being a clear and coherent and fitting part of the narrative, but also on a deeper level being like, oh, by the way, here's a reference to this, which means something else. Because it's not just being like, hey, do you recognize this from this other thing that you like? Like that moment where Violet says the line from All the Wrong Questions to Klaus, it's like, that actually says a lot because not only is it important in that moment, but it also implies something about the relationship between Lemony Snicket and Beatrice if you have read the prequel series,
that's a level
which is
of-
really, really cool.
That's a level of sophistication. I mean, that's basic multi-purpose writing. So like one of the big lessons that, and obviously you'll know this, Gabe, but one of the big lessons that you learn early on when you're writing is that scenes have to be multi-purpose. You can't just write a scene to do one thing. It has to try and do at least two things at once to be compelling and to have narrative drive once you have valent shifts.
Well, that's subtext.
Yeah.
That's the whole point
And-
of subtext.
Exactly. So what you want to do is you want to have those moments where you want to have those lovely drop-in references that fans are going to recognize, but you make them multi-purpose such that new people coming in, so anyone that doesn't know the series or is unfamiliar with the source material, can drop in and still enjoy what's happening and not be confused. Whereas I think, as you say, as much as I had fun with Rogue One, and maybe it's just that we went to the midnight, there's reasons that I have fun with it, but there are moments in that where they have scenes that are just, they do one thing and they do it averagely. And you go, oh, that was a weird thing to drop in here. But fans are like, oh, it's the guys from the bar on Tatooine. But when I saw that, I was like, what's happening?
It annoys me because like it's such a fucking nostalgia wank, stuff like that, where you watch that in Rogue One and it's like, what is the point? What is the point apart from a fan patting themselves on the back and saying, hey guys, it's that thing from Star Wars that I recognize from that film that I like. Whereas like in Lemony Snicket, moments like that are like, oh fuck, like that actually has a deeper meaning. Like not only do you get the thrill of recognition, but it actually has a deeper meaning that serves the themes and serves the narrative in a way that makes sense, which is, when you stop and think about it, very, very, very fucking clever.
And so hard to do in a way that, hard to do in a way that
Absolutely.
works. And it's the thing that,
in
as
a way that
writer,
doesn't
you
feel obtrusive.
Yeah, as a writer, that's what you want to do. Like, you want to have those moments. Like, okay, so we were talking about Sherlock in the car before, and one of the things that I was talking to Ben about this idea of, so, and we're not going to spoil season 4, but one of the biggest
Because I haven't
disappointments...
seen it.
Yeah, one of my biggest disappointments for season 4 was that they immediately, at the end of episode 2, I think, or maybe it's the middle, they reveal what the cliffhanger of season 3 meant, but it doesn't feel earned, it doesn't feel rewarded. It just, again, as Sherlock always seems to do, it feels kind of cheap. where you get the moment where you're like, oh, cool, I know what, the east wind blows or whatever the phrase is. I know what that means now, but I still don't care because the show has spent way too long building up those seeds and then just immediately resolving them. Where they're like, okay.
Also, I mean, it just kind of retrospectively makes the Abominable Bride special seem that much more completely useless.
I didn't watch it because I knew it would be shit.
Oh, it was, and nothing that. Look, fuck, we really shouldn't be going on this tangent. But I mean,
it's fine.
That's one that really irritated me because I went and saw that. I mean, because that was at the point where like, I think Abominable Bride was the sort of the jumping the shark point for Sherlock because season 3 had a lot of issues, but a good season 4 would have been enough for me to forgive it. And when Abominable Bride came out, I was like, oh, it's a Sherlock episode that takes place outside of the main continuity, set entirely in Victorian London. Sweet, I'm cool to check this out. This will be fun. Like, it's, a classical Victorian Sherlock murder mystery with Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman. But like all of Sherlock post-season 2, it falls into the trap where instead of being just a standalone mystery story, every episode has to be like some bigger part of this huge overarching narrative involving Moriarty or what the fuck ever's going on. And in that episode, like, when you get the halfway point of this, like, reasonably compelling Victorian ghost story murder mystery, suddenly it's like, there's this, and I say in inverted commas, twist, where it's like, oh, guess what? All of this was just happening in Sherlock's head while he's trying to solve the mystery of how Moriarty came back from the dead in the present day. And it's like, what the... it's so annoying. Well, and you're looking at it being like, it's... And on top of that, the whole episode turns out to be Sherlock trying to figure out how Moriarty came back from the dead. And then at the end of the episode, when he solved the mystery, I guess the Victorian mystery in his mind palace with... It's literally as dumb as it sounds.
Wait, seriously? It's in his mind palace the whole episode?
Yep. The whole episode's in his mind palace.
What does Moffat think a mind palace is?
Like, I don't know.
A literal palace.
Look, there's this whole thing in that where, like, I guess the episode, the whole thing is that there was a crime in the 1800s where a woman came back from the dead after shooting herself in the head to like cause havoc, and Sherlock's trying to figure out how she did that by placing himself in I guess the circumstances as the detective trying to solve it in his head. And then there's this awful scene like towards the end where like he ends up nonsensically having a fight with Moriarty in the 1800s, and John Watson comes and saves him, and Sherlock's like, how did you know to save him? John Watson's like, I've written enough stories to know when I'm in one. And it's like, don't
what?
you
don't
fucking
Moffat,
you just... And then the end of the episode is like in the present day, it's Sherlock being like to Watson, I know what Moriarty's going to do next. I figured it out. And that's kind of the cliffhanger, being like, but he hasn't.
Because
like,
season
4 starts
season 4
without
opens
missing
with
a
him
beat.
having no idea.
Exactly. It doesn't make any fucking sense. It's
The whole
so
season is like, what's Moriarty doing?
bad.
That's the whole season.
It's just...
I'm so glad I didn't watch it.
So I enjoyed a series of unfortunate events. What about you guys?
Look, sorry.
how
that
good was the
happened.
series of unfortunate events?
Sorry, we had to...
Yeah, look, that's... To be honest, that's the first, like, we don't get to record our movie maintenance on that for, like, another week. Yeah. So that's the first time I've actually got to let out my feelings about how fucking dumb Sherlock is.
You know what? I'll say this, though, before we move on. And I know that we have to move on, but I will say this before we move on. It is one of the best, I think, filmed and, like, visually produced shows that's going.
Cinematography is
like
decent.
Sherlock or Unfortunate Events?
Sherlock. Well, also
both
Unfortunate
even,
Events
to be
for different
honest.
reasons. But I think the way that Sherlock does... I mean, as an example, in season 4, when he's like working out the piece of paper in the room and they have that, like, just some of the cinematography they do is really creative and interesting. I still don't...
visually it's very sexy.
It's very sexy visually, and I think that's Moffat's strong suit. He's like the J.J. Abrams of BBC.
Well, I suppose, I mean, is it his strong suit though? Because, I mean, he's strictly a writer. I mean, that
I mean,
seems
he has
like
nothing to do
just
with
kind of
it.
more
Yeah.
production value.
I was trying to give him credit,
else.
Gabe. I was trying to help, but it's too late.
I mean, like, you can give Moffat credit. I mean, like, Coupling is possibly the funniest sitcom of the last 20 years.
That's not true. What about A Bigger Bang Theory? The world's most popular show. Gabriel.
I'm sorry, I'm falling into
Is
silence.
that like? Did you like feel like the white noise like burst into your brain? You're like,
Oh, look, I felt
Show's
like
beautiful.
I felt this fiery heat of rage kind of build up inside me. Then I was like, "Hang on, you're in another state. I can't punch you right now."
it's kind of like finding out that someone's cheated on you, but with like The Big Bang Theory, and you're like,
Oh God,
jeez.
I mean, that's kind of the point at which you sort of kill yourself, isn't it?
there's no
show
coming
is
back from
so
that.
bad. But what I was going to say about Unfortunate Events to try and get us back on track is I was saying to Ben when I was about halfway through that the way that they compose shots with models and real stuff, and the way that they do all that stuff is like real Wes Anderson, cool.
Isn't it just?
It's so Wes
Like-
Anderson, and like in a fun way, not like a wanky way.
Yeah, and it doesn't feel like it's ripping him off. I mean, a lot of people compared the movie to Tim Burton. The TV show is a lot more Wes Anderson in a way that works. Like little like cool shots, like the way the Poe house is like this tiny house,
And like he's
in all
sitting
these,
against
like-
the fridge, and it
Yeah,
never feels
yeah.
weird because you're like, of course.
Yeah.
Like I think that was the
Yeah.
thing they did very well. Is you know what it was? Is they did those awesome cool shots and those cool visuals, but they never stopped to wank themselves over it. Like a classic.
No, not at all.
You know, like, and not to talk about Sherlock again, but it's gonna happen. So one of the things that Moffat, or one of the things that Doctor Who and Sherlock both do, is they'll come up with a really awesome idea, and when it happens, they'll kind of like linger on it to let you know it's cool. Whereas Unfortunate
Yeah,
Events was
yeah.
like, we did this cool thing. If you want to notice it, no worries. If you don't, that's fine too.
They
Let's move
don't
on.
break the flow
that's-
of the cinematography to wank themselves off. They just
That's when
they
when
just
fan
pass it
service
through.
becomes annoying is when it becomes interfering to the plot.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, this is like, I think it was Red Letter Media made this really good point about the AT-ATs in Rogue One. And it was like, the AT-ATs in Rogue One, like it didn't make any sense for them to be there. They were just there because AT-ATs are cool. And here are the big walking metal things that people like from previous films. In Empire Strikes Back, they weren't there because they were cool. They were there because they made sense in the context of a snow planet where you couldn't have, vehicles moving along there. You needed something to walk and get through the snow.
You can drive a fucking Jeep.
And yeah, and it's the same thing where it's like, it's the things that are cool are not cool because the filmmakers are like pointing at them being like, hey, look how cool this is, which is what all of latter-day Doctor Who has done and all of sort of Sherlock has done the last 2 seasons. It's when they just are, because it's just part of it and it's effortless and it's confident and it's like, hey, we're not going to linger on this because we're reasonably confident that we will have something just as cool, if not cooler, in the very next scene.
And that's, I mean,
Everything we're doing is good.
and when that happens, it is so joyous to watch. Like that, there's a moment, and there's again, Sherlock, I'm gonna do it, and then I'll talk about Unfortunate Events again, but there's a moment in Sherlock season 4 where, and it's that scene in the street where he's talking to the woman whose case he's taking, and he's deciding how he knew where she hung the piece of paper, and he walks around, he's moving, he creates a window and creates a corkboard, and he does all this stuff, and it's filmed in such a beautiful way, and I was like, wow, that scene was gorgeous and it was well written. And Unfortunate Events have so many of those. The scene where they it's in the Wide Window episode, and they're in the restaurant, and the waiter, what's the restaurant called? It's on the tip of my tongue.
The Anxious Clown.
Anxious Clown. And he's like, I hope no one's allergic to anything. And then Olaf and they keep talking the whole time, and they're talking.
Olaf and Poe, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's right, Olaf and Poe. And they're talking the whole time while this waiter is like, I hope no one's allergic to anything. That would be a shame. And the kids are like, what the fuck is happening? And they kind of, they do this round, I can't think of what it's called, but it's where they rotate the shot around the table until it's on the clown's face, and then it slowly pans in as he's like, I hope you're not allergic to anything. And then Violet's like, oh, we're allergic to mints. And he's like, good. And then he fades away, and they keep talking. And that scene was so seamlessly done and so enjoyable to watch that I was just like, oh. I didn't even notice it at the time because it felt so natural and so enjoyable. But when it was done,
also,
I was like, wow.
But also there was this beautiful subtext to it, like when he comes back with the mints, and obviously so they can get out of there. And Violet has just said we're allergic to mints, and it ties into one of the biggest themes of the series, which is that adults don't pay attention to kids.
Yeah.
And Mr. Poe never once looks at the mints and says, hang on, you can't have those because you're allergic, even though Violet literally seconds earlier has said we're allergic to mints. Olaf doesn't pay attention. Poe doesn't pay attention.
No one does.
Because they don't care.
And the only people that do are within that sphere of the organization.
Yes.
And I think that's why I think that's why the series is so magnetic as a kid, is that they're adults that pay attention to kids and genuinely care about them.
Yeah, and and I mean, that comes kind of back to what we were saying before, where it's like, what's so beautiful about the series is even in moments like that are really well constructed and really good, even then there's a clever subtext operating beneath it.
And I think...
And a meaning to all of it.
And doing that multi-purpose storytelling is what it's all about. Because at the end of the day, if you have a good script and you have these scenes in a TV show where it's well set out, it's well directed, it's got a beautiful aesthetic, the acting is well done, the timing is perfect, and ultimately what you get is this show that maybe Unfortunate Events isn't going to be a classic that everyone is talking about. In 15 years, no one's going to be like, bring back Unfortunate Events. People in 15 years will still be talking about bring back Firefly or whatever.
I think people are going to be... I don't think people will be bring back Unfortunate Events, because this is basically a definitive version of it.
But that's what
Yeah,
I mean.
and-
It is so complete.
Yeah.
In every sense that it could be that no one is.
Well, you
gonna
won't
turn
need
around.
to,
Yeah.
because also like I mean they're already making a second season. They've
yeah,
pretty
of
much
course.
confirmed that there's only going to be 3 seasons.
Right.
So it has every chance of like finishing its story. And also like I mean because I think I read an interview where they were saying, oh, how many seasons do you think you can get out of it? And Barry Sonnenfeld was like, look, the kids are going to grow up. We don't want to film them when they're too old. We want to make 3 seasons. That'll cover all of the books. And then we're going to see what else we can do, which to me implies a cheeky All the Wrong Questions season, which is going to be just fine by me.
Mate, if they did that, I would be as happy as a pig.
Oh,
in mud.
imagine if they did that like as their season 4, as like Lemony Snicket's All the Wrong Questions.
would you have
but
as
like did
young-
it as like a
Like a bonus.
oh, I mean you'd
season
have
or
to cast a
something.
kid, but like
Yeah.
if they did it like in black and white noir,
Oh, like
That would be
Like the whole-
super risky, but if it's a Netflix series, so they could
so
they could
good.
just go and
if
do it.
anybody could roll the dice and do that, it'd be Netflix.
Yeah.
If you had to cast someone as young Snicket, who would you pick, Gabe?
Oh, but like I can't think of anything because he's 13. I don't really know any 13-year-old actors
that's tough.
who.
He also has to look like what's
Well,
his
not
name?
necessarily, because Patrick is like a built-ass man.
Yeah.
I mean, you would have to go with... see, my instinct is to go with... Who's the new Spider-Man kid?
Tom Holland. Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that right?
You want like a Tom Holland who's
Yeah.
a bit grittier and a bit like spunkier. I don't know. We haven't seen much of him, but like someone like that who's kind of like a newer person who isn't like a character actor or like a like a young rising star. You want someone who's gonna just do a good job of it and then put it in the bucket
Yeah.
and be like, great, I did a good job. Move on with my life. Fuck, I'd love to see that.
But I mean, like the beauty of it is like if Unfortunate Events has been the success people think it is, and if it continues to be a success, things like that are possible. Like things like okay, the ostensible 4th season of the show could just be a 1-season crack at a prequel set 30 years earlier, which is a noir detective story as opposed to like a gothic fantasy story. I mean, how fucking cool would
And
that
you
be?
could
How
have-
daring would that be?
And you could still have Patrick narrate the whole thing.
Yeah, if you wanted,
Yeah, you
absolutely.
You could keep the same narrative
Yeah.
structure if that was something the studio wanted. Oh, there's something now I'm
Yeah.
just excited about what they could do with that. But look, I think that's probably a great place to end because now we're basically just talking about how much we love Unfortunate Events, which is what we wanted to do in the end.
Which we, haven't been talking about for an hour or
Look,
anything. but,
we drove to Sherlock, we drove to Doctor Who, we drove to the film, and we eventually parked our car back at the TV show. So it feels like probably a natural place to end before things
Absolutely.
get too out of hand. Look, I want to, as always, thank you for dropping by and jumping on our show. We always love having you. That sounded way too.
No, thanks for
sensitive.
having me, man.
Like, yeah, it was awesome.
Absolute pleasure.
We look forward to obviously, I'll be down in the future. There'll be more stuff with us, and this isn't the last we'll hear of Gabriel Bergmoser. If you want to listen to Movie Maintenance, you can find it on iTunes if you just look up Movie Maintenance. You guys have some beautiful new art as well, cover art. It looks awesome.
yes, we do. It's
It's
fantastic.
really sexy, and the jokes in it are like real subtle but real nice. There's a Jaws joke that's amazing, which I love. You can find that on iTunes. Also on iTunes, if you just type in Boone Shepherd, that'll come up with the audiobook, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
So you can find that as well.
Complete with all my silly
Gabe
voices.
doing all of the lovely,
Oh, that's
ridiculous
beautiful.
voices. Yeah, he does all of them. It's great. There's like Scottish people, there's Americans, there's British
Oh,
people.
by the way, we're prepping to do the audiobook recording for the second one.
so we can
it
hear you do
will-
like an Elvis voice.
I do an Elvis
Oh,
voice.
God.
Oh,
I will do an Elvis
ooh,
voice.
that's brutal.
That is tough to
So
hear.
and you didn't hear it from me except for the fact that you did. Hunter S. Thompson as well.
Ooh.
So
It's kind of sexy.
prepare yourself.
Can we end with can you give us a quick drop of the Elvis voice? I know that it's
No, I haven't practiced it yet. I'm gonna-
Gabe, you're breaking my
I'm not-
heart. That's
we
fine.
need to-
I know, but it's just more incentive to come back for the
That's
second Boone Shepherd.
fine.
So
look, if you want to buy the book, you can go to belfrogbooks. Is it .com.au or is it .com?
I think it's just .com.
If you Google Belfrog Books.
Yeah, they'll probably come up.
It'll come
And
up.
it'll be in the show notes anyway, but you can go there, you can buy the book.
Yeah.
You can buy the ebook, you can buy the audiobook, all that good stuff. Gabe, where are you on Twitter? Where can we find you?
I'm at Bergmoser, so G-O Bergmoser, which is spelled exactly how it sounds.
Yep, that's good, and it will be in the title of the episode as well. I assume
Yeah.
the last name. I'm at DC at My Hate Pie,
I'm at Literal Citrus.
and we'll see you guys next week.
Hello, my name is Lemony Snicket, and once again I find myself in a dimly lit room talking to a complete stranger. The complete stranger is you, and the room belongs to Netflix, a company responsible for filming a series of unfortunate events. Under ordinary circumstances, this room would be buzzing with excitement and activity as directors, designers, stagehands, and indentured servants prepare for a dazzling season of top-notch entertainment. But the story of the Baudelaire orphans is so upsetting and so utterly unnerving. The entire crew is suffering from low morale, a phrase which here means currently under medical observation for melancholia, ennui, and acute wistfulness.
Joy, joy, happiness, my fortune's about to change.